Hey everyone, so these first couple videos might be a little crude. I have no way of editing any of these, but it's not really the point. The point is to get information across. So I'm going to start the first one based on setting up your first bin, just what to be prepared for, what to have ready before your worms come, and what to look for before you start feeding your worms. So I will get adjusted here and we'll start building a bin for a population I'm going to move over. So the bins I use, very basic, Rubbermaid, Walmart, cheap, simple, easy. This size of bin being a 3-gallon, one of the smallest ones you can find, I will typically start with this size for 1 pound. I usually don't start a colony less than a pound, mostly because I don't have the patience to wait for growth. So you can start your bedding with many different materials. I simply use shredded paper and shredded cardboard. You can use coconut coir, you can use peat moss. With those two, you want to make sure you soak and strain them very well. They'll tend to have a little bit of acidity in them, and you want to keep your bins neutral. I shred mine simply for the fact that it breaks down faster. The worms process a lot quicker, and again, it's just a patience thing. You can use whatever you want. Moisture is going to be one of your most important things to worry about inside a worm bin. You can run into many different problems based on too much or too little. The primary being that worms breathe through the moisture inside their bin. You can just shred this by hand. It's all, again, based on patience and time. But for $30 on Amazon, I bought an 8-sheet crosscut shredder, and I make it shred cardboard, regular corrugated cardboard, just fine. It's not thrilled about it, but it does the job. And it works perfect for me. And for the price, you can't go wrong. So you want to give this a couple minutes just to soak up most of the moisture. I've done this 100 times, so I know exactly what I'm looking for. You don't want to have any water puddling or pooling. I find any of these videos that recommend running a second layer and you collect the leachate, that is not, I would caution against that. Any excess moisture that you find draining out of your bin is obviously way more than is needed to keep your bin sustained. Simple rule of thumb, you want your product to be able to squish and hold its shape, break up easily, and you never want to be able to wring any moisture out. One of the most important things with setting up a new bin, if you do not have worms or have not had worms before, and you are setting up a brand new bin, you need to find someone that has had worms before, or you need to get soil from your garden, from the outdoors. You need the beneficial microbes and all the microbiology that goes on naturally in the ground. That's how these worms thrive. Most shippers will just take coconut coir or peat moss, moisten it, throw their worms in the bag, and you will not get any of the beneficial bacteria or any of the living organisms that are in the castings with your new worms. So when you take that bag of new worms and dump them into an environment that has none of that, they're not going to thrive. So anytime I set up a new bin, I make sure I carry over a lot of castings or a lot of partially shredded material that comes from a bin that I already have. You need that stuff in there for these worms to thrive, guys. If you do not, they'll live, but you're going to lose a lot before they start reproducing, and you're not going to be happy with your results. So essentially, my new bin's ready to go. Ideally, I would like to have my product coming from my experienced bin. I mean, I can take some of the stuff just right off the top and throw it in. It would be nice to let that stuff sit for a couple days. You don't have to. The worms are going to go where they're happy. They're not going to stay in an environment they're not happy. Another thing I do with my bins, and I'll tilt you back down again, I do not use the lids. I don't drill holes. I don't duct tape screens. I don't do any of that stuff. My bins simply just get cardboard covering. That's it. For a few reasons. Number one, it helps keep the worms down in the bin. They don't like the light. Now, what I've been told and what I agree with is if you find your worms are escaping and you're using a lid because they're escaping, well, all you're doing is using that lid to force them to stay in an environment they're not happy with. If your worms are crawling up the sides and trying to get out of your box, they're obviously not happy with where they're staying. I find the lids hold too much moisture in, you start getting condensation, and they start getting squirmy and weird. I've just never had success with keeping a lid on a bin. The other reason I like to use just straight paper is it allows a lot of evaporation, so I'm in control of the moisture content in my bin. I will sooner have it get a tad dry than I will wet, because I can always add more water. But once you start getting a really wet bin, and if you're feeding stuff like melons, cucumbers, stuff that has a lot of water content already, and then you throw a lid on top of that, you're going to struggle with your moisture and you're going to have excess. And as I mentioned before, if you got excess moisture, or if you're running a system that, you're harvesting leachate directly out of the bin, you have way too much water in there, guys. So not only do they breathe through the water, but they potentially can drown. It's said that they can sit in straight water for days and be fine, but why would you want to keep them in a situation or in an environment they're not 100% happy with? So I just use straight paper. If I find in the winter months the humidity and the ambient air humidity is a lot drier, I will wet that paper. You can see this one here has been wet down many, many times just to help keep the moisture down in there. Otherwise, I have this bottle, I put a few holes in the top, and I just sprinkle it down. Mix it up really good, and really when it comes to starting your first bin, there's not much more to it. Just the importance is having the beneficial microbes, the bacteria, the stuff that is in the existing soil and castings to get yourself going. If I were to get to a point where I start shipping and selling worms, all my worms would be sold with material that came directly out of the bin that they're living in. I would never just throw them in coconut coir or peat moss because they're not happy in that. That's not where they thrive. And it's what every commercial grower is going to do. And I'm sure I may get backlash about that. It's every worm package I've ever ordered comes in straight peat moss or coconut coir. It's just my personal preference. Why wouldn't you want to start your new clients off with the best environment possible? I purchased some worms from a gentleman who works directly with the Canadian federal government, and he has the same idea. He will not sell you a direct pound of worms, but he will give you a ton of material that they were living in. So you're going to have all those beneficial microbes, bacterias. You're going to have cocoons. You're going to have baby worms. You're going to have juveniles. You're going to have adults. You're going to have everything all mixed into one. It's where they were thriving. Why wouldn't you send that entire environment with it? So I guess in a nutshell, that's really setting up a new bin. Not much more to it. I'll slide over my other bin that I have, and I'll just show you what I'm looking for before I go to feed. I will go through my bins depending on the situations and what's going on. I mean, it's not common for me to go through every 3-4 days. Typically a week. I don't like to have food that hasn't been eaten last longer than a week. Excess feeding is going to increase the acidity levels in your bin. Excess food that's not being eaten and broken down. And it starts rotting, it gets nasty, and you just don't want those environments or conditions. Okay, look at that. Got a nice egg cocoon right on the top. So right on the top, just as I happen to look down, there's a fairly fresh egg. Lighter color means it's laid more recently. As they mature and get darker, or as they mature and get closer to hatching, they'll get darker, just like you can probably see a bit of the color difference. They will get darker than that as well, much darker, but you can probably see the color difference already. So I'll tilt you guys down and I'll show you what I'm looking for before I feed and what's going on in this bin particularly. So this was a fresh pound of worms I bought 2 months ago, maybe less than that. But right off the bat, I have eggs everywhere. There are eggs and cocoons. Here's a nice dark one. Just all over in this bin. So my reproduction rates are just explosive. And I'm finding that the damper I keep the environment, the better I'm having with reproduction. Now, that also can bring in potworms. Potworms are not detrimental to your bin. However, they thrive in conditions that are not ideal for your red wigglers. So as we can see here, I think I fed in this corner last, which is probably why you're going to see so many worms right here. But again, cocoons, 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 they're everywhere, guys. These things are just explosive. And again, I find I used to run my systems a lot drier than this, and I did not have the reproductive growth that I'm seeing here, but I also didn't have potworms like I have had in this setup. But these cocoons in here, guys, is just, I'm shocked personally. I've never really seen much like this. And they are breaking down this bedding material so fast. Like I said, this bin is less than 2 months old, and there is some peat moss and coconut coir in here from shipping. I tried to get most of it out, but this is mostly castings. So I usually always keep a little layer on top, just as kind of a buffer underneath the paper that I use. Eventually it just gets mixed in. Here we got an old banana stem. The banana stems are really fibrous. They take longer to break down. I do feed a lot of bananas because they're cheap and they love them. They absolutely love them. This, I don't even know what the heck that is. So here's where I fed last time. I find, so the baby worms have really easy access to bananas. They're soft, they break down so fast. They just love them and they're cheap. You'll see here, this is kind of the stump of some lettuce. I don't freeze my scraps before I feed them. I am going to start doing that. And the reason behind that is when you freeze the food, the cell walls inside that food rupture when you freeze them. So when you thaw it, they get very soft and break down very quickly, very easily. So I'm just at the top of a banana that I left in here before. And I'm just trying to get rid of some of this stuff so that I can show you, in particular, the potworms that I'm talking about. Definitely some good mites in here, but mites aren't really anything to worry about. So let's see if I can show you the difference. So in between my two fingers here, there's a small red wiggler right there. That's a baby red wiggler. Then, geez, where'd that little potworm go? Your potworms are going to be white. They'll always be white. Yeah, pretty heavy mite load, but again, not too worried about it. And I'm actually finding as this material dries down a little bit, my potworm load has really gone down quite a bit. So the other thing I have in here is romaine lettuce. Look at the worms in here, guys. But again, this has been in here for almost 2 weeks. Didn't freeze it, so it is taking forever to break down. It is taking a very long time. So when you're dealing with greens and stuff like that, again, I'm going to start freezing them, that's for sure. But yeah, very happy, very healthy bin I have here. I'm quite impressed, and I'm probably going to think about taking some material out of here and getting my new bin that I just showed you set up and aged. And I will start, I have a second bin this exact same size with a second pound that I bought as well, doing the exact same. So I will probably split these, take half the worms out of here. When what I've been told is that as worms start getting too heavily populated, they may not reproduce quite as much. And obviously reproduction is your number one goal. So anyways, guys, I don't know what I skipped or what else there is. Leave questions, leave comments, ask away. As you can see, I feel like I'm doing really good with mine. So if there's anything I can help you out with, let me know and I can keep the videos coming. Thanks, guys. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and take care.